Hi. Sip hot hot hot. Ba da dee ba 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 do. Tuesday something and Thursday too. Hey, I don't care about you. It's Wednesday. I'm throwing stuff around. Around. Hi, would you like some picks of the week? Ba da ba da ba da. So, still broke. So, still have a ton of comics sitting in my thing. I'm emptying the bag out like 10 at a time, but I got some money hopefully coming in. Well, shit. I got this job, a very lucrative job, uh, freelance writing for commercials. So Bill Hicks is very upset with me. And they actually gave me it slows down, but they gave me some work this month of September. But if history has taught me anything, it's never start a land war in Southeast Asia, and also these people will not pay me until November. But I mentioned briefly, I think last week, that I am going to be actually working at the comic shop more. Had at the beginning of the summer, I'd had a gig driving for him to pick up the new stuff on Tuesdays, but that obviously went bye bye once my car also went bye bye. But he needs somebody in there to organize all their back issues, and boy, has he found the man for a job. Yes, technically, I'm a man. So I'm going to start working there Monday, um, like just 3 days a week until I can quit one of my other crap jobs. But hopefully, I mean that infusion of cash at the top of the month should hopefully, like, I might just tell him, hell, give me the goddamn bag, and that'll be my pay for October. But in the meantime, I really have been. I really feel like I've not had much time to read lately, and I got to do something about that myself. I've also had the boy with me for a couple weeks, so that cuts into a lot of my reading time. Um, but I am enjoying it more. Like, the fewer comics I have, the more I kind of appreciate what I do have, and I don't know. I talk about it enough. I have subscribed to the Marvel Unlimited application, which gives me access to a vast portion of Marvel's back catalog. But they kind of revamped the app. Now it's called Marvel Infinity, and they've always had uh, digital only comics on that app, comics that were specifically created to be read digitally, and they're usually garbage. They're usually stuff that I wouldn't buy, stuff that I don't mind reading, but certainly nothing I needed to own. But since they've done this relaunch, they're really pushing this new brand called Infinity Comics, and I'm actually pretty into them. When I was, oh good, get comfortable because Granddad's about to reminisce. Actually, I've also realized how much this sounds ridiculous. It sounds ridiculous for me to refer to myself as a comic book historian, but having watched a few of these just this week, I was like, oh yeah, no, that's pretty much what he is. And the fact, I mean, not just because I'm pretty well read in the whole history of the industry and of the art form, but I've also been watching it as it's been, for the last 30 years. So 35 almost, 33. Uh, right. So in the early 90s, Scott McCloud, who was an indie darling, he had a book called Zot, and it was a black and white comic published by Eclipse, I believe. It was a cult sensation, and it was one of the first books that caught my eye when I started reading comic books. But I didn't really get to read any. I couldn't get my hands on any until much later. And by then, honestly, my interest had waned. But Scott McCloud did a graphic novel in 1992, I want to say, maybe 93, called Understanding Comics. And it is probably the best book you'll ever read about comic books and how they work and why they're great. And he's got the whole history of them up until then. He tends to lean especially heavily into the Japanese stuff, which never has interested me a ton. But any interest I do have in Japanese comics comes from Scott McCloud and understanding comics. So suffice it to say, I was immediately on board. There was Dave published a preview of it in the back of Cerebus around the time, which is how I discovered a lot of comics back in the early 90s. That's how I got into Bone. That was how I got into understanding comics. I think that was how I got into Flaming Carrot. Dave, that was another thing on my whole Dave Sim spiel from a few weeks ago. Another thing that Dave doesn't probably get enough credit for now, anyway, because he's certainly burned a lot of bridges since. But he was very supportive of up and coming independent comic book artists, especially ones that were self publishing, because that was his whole thing. And so, understanding comics quickly became the text. And I wrote several papers in college about comic books, and understanding comics was always my main source. Up until that point, Will Eisner, creator of The Spirit from the 40s, had been sort of the preeminent comic book historian. But also, Eisner's approach was always from a technician's standpoint. Like all the, because he was like one of the first, if not the first guy, maybe Harvey Kurtzman, to teach or maybe even Joe Kubert, maybe, I don't know. No, I think Eisner was probably first. So he like taught how to make comic books and how comics worked, and so, but he always came from that angle. I'm a guy who's made his whole career making comics, and here's how you can too. McCloud came at it from, he incorporated a lot of that and a lot of Eisner's work, but it was more for readers. It was for people who are like myself, who are like, I love comic books, but can somebody explain to me why? Or for, every woman I dated in my 20s, so that I would, why did you spend so much time? Here, read this. And so, yeah, and to this day, I still swear by it. The follow up. Well, and then we get into some little. So he did a follow up in the late 90s, maybe early 2000s, called Reinventing Comics. I'm trying to think. Because he did Reinventing was second. And I think Making Comics was the third one. Or I might have those transposed. But regardless, he did a book in the early 2000s called Reinventing Comics. And it was his attempt at what the future of comics would hold. And in the early 2000s, of course, the internet was still, I mean, it was very new to me, although, I was behind the curve. But he went into a lot of that. And I poo pooed that like I have not poo pooed it before or since. There are two sticking points of his theory that the internet would be a whole new galaxy of comics in beautiful Van Nuys, California. There was one point, because he narrates the book. He's a character. He's the main character in the book, and then he walks you through it. His little cartoon version of him. And at one point, he's talking about how much easier it is to draw comics on computer, which is true. That is largely, he was right in that respect. That computers have become instrumental. I mean, I'm sure there are still creators that only use pen and ink, and I think for the most part, I think the mainstream comics probably use a lot more computers than the indie stuff. But computers are very. But in 2004, he was like, "And I've been drawing this whole book with computers. You never noticed." And I was like, "Honey, I noticed. Okay, I'm not a moron." Now, if you tell me, uh, if you showed me a comic and said this is all drawn on a computer, I would have to go, "Oh, okay, I didn't realize that." But at the time, I was like, "Shut up." But he was right. He did turn out to be right about that. The other thing he claimed, or that he predicted, was that interactive comics online were going to be the next big thing. And boy, not for a lack of trying, did they try, and for the most part, I feel like for the most part, diehards like myself refuse to make the move to web comics. I've read a few. I've probably read more just in the last couple years. But I remember Warren Ellis had a book called Freak Angels that I can't remember who drew it for him. But this was back when I was anything Warren Ellis did, I would buy. But and so he would, and they were giving it away, and I didn't care. He was like, "You can read this online for free, and every week we'll put a new page up or something like that." And I just didn't bother. But when they put it into a collected form and asked me to pay money for it, I went, "Here you go," because I want to take this home and read it like a comic book. I don't. I'm thinking, and I'm taking up time because I don't want to take up much more. Why did I even get started on this? Oh, right, because I was talking about Infinity Comics. So McLeod's big prediction though was that comics would start out on the web just like they are in traditional comic book form, where people would just read panel to panel. But he was like, but with the internet, you can do all kinds of things, and people can click on a panel, and it'll show them other blah and this and that and the other thing. That is only now starting to become a thing, and people still don't really like them. I don't think it was at the time that like Flash animation was a big deal, and people were really into that, and nobody gives a crap about that anymore. I mean, the boy knows more about it than I do, but what I'm getting at is that I'm finally with these Infinity comics that Marvel has now, and they're not to the extent that McLeod predicted. But when I saw in the Marvel app that they were going to do this, I was like, oh boy, here we go. And I immediately thought of Scott McLeod, and I went, all right, you're gonna have your interactive comic books. Um, but what they do, so the Infinity comics, you scroll up, and there's no page breaks, so you just keep scrolling. And the X Men that they have, which was written by Jonathan Hickman and drawn by Pepe Larraz, are one of the X book guys. Really good artwork. Really, what they did was they would have these really long panels, and I was like, okay, now we're talking. Now you're using the medium of comic books with this new. This is also when reinventing comics was written. Tablets and iPhone and smartphones were not yet really a thing. As I was reminded watching The Departed again recently in 2006, and everyone still had a flip phone. But yeah, it was fun. There's a sequence where Wolverine falls down an elevator shaft, and you have to keep scrolling. And I was like, all right, well now we're talking. Why did I start that though? I knew that was the point I was getting to. It doesn't. Oh, I think what I was meandering towards was that now that I'm not buying as many comics, or I haven't been buying as many comics. I have been just kind of enjoying the ones that I have been a little bit more, and not kind of being, because now like there's one book, I don't want to say which one because I'm trying not to be negative. There's one book that I written by a writer that is a really good creative team and started off strong, but like a lot of indie books, they start off strong and then by issue 8 or 9, I'm like, I don't even know what's happening anymore because all these characters look the same and there's nothing differentiating, and they're not Marvel superheroes, so I don't have an immediate, 30-year history of the character that I can draw to mind, and so I lose interest. So I'm just focusing on Marvel now. How do you like that? So this week's picks of the week is just all the X books from the last couple of weeks. Uh, X Corp number 5, X Men number 3, and X Men The Onslaught Revelation number 1. Which I still haven't read Onslaught, and I probably should, but it also. But these all build up to this week, Inferno. I'm super excited for this. And then I also have Sword number 8 and Wolverine number 16. So when I get into reading this week, it'll be all X books for Granddad right at the top. But Inferno, I'm very excited for it. I think it's going to have very, very little to do with the original Inferno. Not unlike Jason Aaron's Heroes Reborn had very little to do with the Heroes Reborn of yesteryear. But I'm still excited because Inferno was my first Marvel crossover, and it remains one of my favorites. I reread it recently, like last year, I guess. Really holds up. I mean, it's still what it is, but I'm just excited for it. The way they've been teasing it in the ads is that the X-Men's, well, this is Moira McTaggart, who was Professor X's girlfriend for a long time, and also a mutant researcher herself because her son Kevin became Proteus. And at the beginning of Jonathan Hickman's X run, House of X slash Powers of X, Moira McTaggart, it's revealed, is herself a mutant, and I think her mutant power is that she's essentially she keeps being reborn. So she keeps living her life over and over again, but she keeps remembering everything from her previous lives. I think I'm remembering that right. And so that was the big, oh, this was the kind of the key to Krakoa. This was, since she knew everything, and her and Charles kind of got together, and then I think she died again. I don't remember how that ended now. I should go back and read those because those are on the app again, and still some of the best X stuff I've ever read, even if I don't remember it that well. It's also implied heavily that Professor X and Magneto, as like the co-heads of Krakoa, are up to some nefarious deeds behind the scenes, which has honestly been the vibe the whole time. So really, I'm just excited to read more X books. Good. I'm glad I took 15 minutes to talk about Scott McCloud. I just can't. I can't. It's hard to. Because me talking about it now, I sound somewhat rational. In 2004, when I read it, I was livid, and my poor beleaguered girlfriend at the time, who already had to put up with so much of me, would be like, "Yes, Jimmy, the internet's not going to replace com. Okay, can we just go to sleep?" I hope she's doing okay. Picks out of the week. Now picks up. All right. So last week we had here. First off, I read Baby Teeth number 20, and this was really, from what I remember from the previous issue, that was really more the final story. This is really more, it's not an epilogue, because it does tie directly back into the first issue. But I for sure want to just go back and read this from the beginning, because this is one of those indie books that would take months in between. So I forgot a lot of the stuff. Not for the same, I was talking before, it's not as though the characters are unmemorable. It's just that so much seemed to have happened in the last few issues. Like, time moved forward very quickly. So by the time we get to this issue, I was like, oh, is this kid grown up now? Because I think that's also the case. I don't think uh, the main conceit of the story is that the Antichrist has been born to a teen mom who is obviously just trying to protect him, but she had, it's difficult to do when your son is the Antichrist. Believe you me. Um, so it's kind of like How I Met Your Mother, where she's telling him, uh, the whole story. So he's a baby through the whole book until these last couple issues. So I just want to go, and since it's only 20 issues, I mean, it'll probably be a minute before the trade paperback is available / at the library, but I'd like to. And in fact, I think I have the whole run here. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I do. So I could always just go back and dig them out. I got to get all my comics out and organize them anyway, so maybe I'll do that next week or something. And then I also read Frontiersman #1. This was really fun. This was really, really good. I only. So, okay. At the back of most comics these days, indie comics especially, the writer most often will or maybe sometimes just the editor will have a bit of a editorial to sort of go, hey, welcome to the book, and here's what we want to do. And this guy, Patrick Kinlan, who I'm not familiar with, really is coming at, yeah, that's right, I looked at some of his books and I had not read any of his stuff. I got, my hat is off, because what he's trying to do essentially is big two book, Marvel or DC type superhero book, but better. And oh, no one's thought of that. I mean, it reads a little cocky, like everything's mediocre now. That was one thing he said directly. But around the time of the second image boom in the early 2010s, I began to wonder if this inward-looking approach was long for the world when a publisher experiences brain drain, and there was no other way to characterize what happened to Marvel at the time. Are you left with this continuity? Hard disagree. I think Marvel comics, especially, have only gotten better and better and better and better. There's not a time, and I'm obviously not being objective about this at all, but there hasn't been a time where Marvel superhero books haven't been interesting to me. And I think it's because it's continuity. I can't speak for other people. I've stopped worrying about this for a while now because it was, and I will say, in the early teens and even through the first decade of the century, there was a lot of cry of like, we need to shake things up and blah blah blah. And I was like, honey, I'm all for that, but if Marvel's going to keep publishing the same stuff over and over again, I'm going to keep buying it because it's good and I like it. Having said all that, this is very what I think he might have been better off saying was, "Hey, we want to do a superhero book like a Marvel DC superhero book, but it's not all that continuity." And it's like, "Yeah, dude, I'm all for that." And you've got a character called Frontiersman. I'm on board. So the story is this guy was a big deal superhero back in the day, since retired, but a young college kid is like, "Hey, we want you to come be the face of the environmental movement, essentially." And so Frontiersman's kind of like, "I don't know. I'm kind of into just living in the woods. I already did my time and all this stuff." And so, yeah, that's the thing too about that kind of attitude of like, superhero books are boring. We're gonna do a new one. This is all Image has been doing since the '90s, man. That was what got the whole shebang started. So, and there's already like Astro City and Black Hammer and all these other books that have done Marvel DC type superheroes better than you could find at the big two. So just do that. I don't know why you got to be a dick about it. That was a little bit how I walked away from it. I was like, all right, you can just settle down a little bit. But I'm looking forward to that. I also read, I didn't talk about it last week, but I also did read The Death of Doctor Strange #1. This was super good. I don't know if they're planning on really killing him, or like they did with Wolverine a few years ago, where they killed him and they kept him dead for a while. I mean, it feels like that there's another movie coming, and spoiler alert, Wong is in the Shang-Chi movie. Oh, that's right. Okay. Yeah, this is actually that's the funnest part about that. So we have this issue is, I mean, we know what's going to happen by the end of the book. It's right in the title. So the whole issue is Doctor Strange is going through his day, and it's really just kind of reorienting anyone who hasn't been reading Doctor Strange for the last 10 years, kind of where the character's at. So he's now a surgeon again. He magically fixed his hand, so kind of finally undid his origin. He's also still headmaster of the Strange Academy, although I don't know if that's going to keep going. Although that book's still going, as far as I know. I don't want to spoil the end of this issue, but by the end of the issue, rest assured, Doctor Strange is on the case of who killed Doctor Strange. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this. I'm very curious, and this is one of the reasons I'm pretty happy to not be. I don't read a lot of the press. I don't read Bleeding Cool or any CBR or any of that stuff because I don't want spoilers at all, and those are rife with them. I don't even want to know what's coming out until the week before. So I don't know. This feels like they might just be doing it for fun, and it's not like, oh, we need to kill him off so we can bring in the movie version or something like that. This is just no. We're gonna. This is gonna be fun. People are gonna go, duh. And then by the end of the book, I'm sure it'll be all back to normal, or maybe not. I don't know. It's part of the continuity. All right. I see. This is 24 and a half minutes. It didn't need to be. You can thank Scott McCloud for that. um, Actually, I think I'm just loopy and tired. So let's call it a night. Bleak.